Hi guys, how's it going? Now that we've jumped into Photoshop a little bit, let's start to take a look about with some of the editing tools that exist in the software. We spent some time with selections, which is really important because selections set us up for a lot of the different things that we're going to do. We played around with brushes, which also are important because brushes, are key to doing some editing. And while I edit, I'm going to jump back and forth between a real image of a skate park, and over here with our duck. Not my Harry Potter duck, but just my regular duck. Just so we can kind of see what's going on there a little bit. So, what I want to talk about are some of our editing tools. And what I mean by editing, I mean photo editing, and I mean the kind of tools that we can use to fix photographs as we, start to clean them up and start to make them something that, look a little bit better sometimes. And there's a handful of tools that we can use. There's all of these tools: spot healing, patch tool, content aware tool, these sorts of tools. And underneath it, we have some of these tools, these stamp tools. These are huge, both sets of these tools. So first, I'd like to talk about them. So I'm going to start out with the clone stamp tool. And actually, before I get into the clone stamp tool, I'm going to talk about the pattern stamp tool, just to explain what that is. And I'm going to bring up my layer palette. So we have something to take a look at. So what is the pattern stamp tool? Well, I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's a tool that, it's not that it's useless or anything like that, but it's not an editing tool. It's just a different kind of paintbrush, really. And what it is basically we have the option up here to change our brush size or hardness. We have the ability up here to change our blending modes, and right now we want to keep those at normal. Our opacity and our flow, so we can, how thick this is going to come out. We're going to keep these at normal as well, so 100%. And then over here, what we can do is we can pick a pattern. And Photoshop has a lot of predetermined patterns for us to pick. And so I'm going to take this flowers pattern, for example, right? And watch. I'm going to go ahead and click. And, what is that? What am I doing? Well, essentially, guys, I am painting with a pattern. That's what the pattern stamp tool does. So let's go ahead. Let's pick another pattern. Maybe this blue one here. And hey, check it out. This is just basically a pattern paintbrush. I pointed out just because, not because we're really going to use it a lot, but because we are going to use this one tool called the clone stamp a lot. And they look very similar to one another. One's called the clone stamp, one's called the pattern stamp. When people see that stamp, sometimes they just assume it's the clone. And it's really, there's this stamp with these, these kind of like a checkerboard pattern next to it. That is the pattern stamp. And all it really is it's a paintbrush for patterns. That's it. And so that is kind of the difference between the two tools. Not that this is a, again, useless tool. It's just a tool that I can tell you in the 20 years that I've done this, haven't used very often. If I want to use a pattern, I tend to do it just other ways where I can control it a little bit more. There is one thing I want to point out, though, is this little checkbox here called aligned. We're going to see that in some other stuff too. So what does that mean? So essentially, align means that I can stop painting and take a break, and then I can come back and it just literally picks up where I left off. If I uncheck that and I take a break like I just did and I start painting again, it doesn't quite do that. And this pattern is actually kind of nice because it actually looks like it sort of does. So let's try these like diagonal line patterns to see if we can make this kind of, see what we can do here. So we'll draw that a little bit. I'll unclick and then I'll go to draw it again. And when I zoom in here, you can see in areas like right around here where those patterns don't quite match up. Okay. And so that's because it wasn't aligned. And so that's something you want to point out. There's also this other thing here called Impressionist. So I'll click on that and I'll paint on that for a few minutes. And essentially what this is, and I'm going to make my my brush really hard so we can understand a little bit better. What that is it gives you whatever colors were in the pattern. So I'll jump back to this flower pattern, and it just kind of gives you those colors in a kind of a non-smoothed out kind of line, essentially, and it gives you almost these crazy looking caterpillars. So that's what Impressionist means on this tool. So I'm going to revert. So I'm going to go to File and Revert, and bring my duck back to the beginning. But again, it's not that we really are going to use that tool. It's just that sometimes people click on that tool by accident, and I wanted to point it out just in case. The tool that we are going to use, though, is this one here called the Clone Stamp tool. And this is an awesome tool. This is a tool that's really, really important in Photoshop for lots of reasons, because it can help us fix everything from tears to little specks to having a bird fly in your photo to having dust on a camera lens. This is a really, really, really great tool, and it's been around for quite a while. But at the same time, we have mistakes with this tool as well, because what it does is it literally clones one area to somewhere else. And while that doesn't sound like it's a big deal, it can be extremely noticeable if it's used kind of incorrectly. So this tool really works well, as do many photo editing tools, if we work with a low hardness. So we talked about hardnesses where they're soft or they're hard in a previous video. So this is just one that works a lot better when you have a hardness that's like 0%, which means it's just going to be fuzzy on the edges. If you have a hardness that's 100%, your edits are going to stick out like a sore thumb. And I'm going to go ahead and start with that just so we can see them a little bit better. And then we're going to see that it's kind of problematic. And I just clicked, and this warning came up, and I'll explain that in a second too. So let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'm going to just literally go ahead and click and start to clone. And this warning comes up that just popped up a second ago, and it says, could not use the clone stamp because the area to clone has not been defined. Option click to find a source point. Oh, okay. So I'll click OK to that. So what does that mean, option click? Well, when I hold down the option key, I get this symbol, and this is kind of like a crosshair symbol. And essentially what it's going to allow me to do is sample an area. And that's why it just wouldn't work on a regular click. So I'm going to option click, and that's going to sample a specific area and then allow me to copy or clone it somewhere else. Now, before I even go any further, I really need to talk about layers a little bit, because cloning or editing photos is a destructive process to images. And we want to work as non-destructively as possible. When we were making our character ducks before, we worked really hard to go ahead and make sure that we built everything on layers. So then that way it wasn't all too hard to go ahead and edit, nor was it too hard to go ahead and fix things in case we screwed up. And we want to do the same thing here as much as we possibly can when we are editing photos. So I'm going to do just kind of like, a setup like I did before. I can go ahead and double click on my background layer because it's kind of got that crappy lock on it. And I'll call it original image. And then I'm going to put a big fat padlock on it. Okay, lock down everything. And then I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to just rename that layer something like retouch. And essentially what I'm going to do is up here in my options bar, I just want to go ahead and check out some things. Like I said, we're going to usually use soft edges. I'm only using hard edges just so it sticks out. It's kind of on the nose at the moment. Node mode is going to be normal. Opacity and flow, both 100. aligned. That's something that we do want to keep for sure. This will let us unclick and then re-click again, just like that pattern, and things will line up. So that's an important thing. And then sample, okay? So we can go ahead and say that we're only going to sample the current layer, current and below, or all layers. I recommend usually all layers. This allows us to be on a blank layer like retouch, but when we go ahead and hold down the option key, it just sifts through every single layer there, whether it's 2 like we have here or 50. It doesn't matter. It can sift through and it can look down, and it's a visual. Wherever we're going to go ahead and that option click, it's going to be able to sample through that. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. So let's zoom in a little bit to our duck, and we have this kind of like plastic hair here, and I'm going to go ahead and option click right here, and I'm going to just clone. And again, the way it worked is I'm going to hold down the option key and I'm going to click, and then it's kind of hard to see because I have yellow on yellow, so I'll click over here on white, and check it out. My brush just is yellow, but it's not a paint yellow. It's not paint at all, because you can see that there's little dots inside of there, and those are those like pixels. And see, as I start to paint, okay, over here, I'm copying the pixels that I sampled from. And you can tell simply because there's a little crosshair. When I move to the right, it moves to the right. When I move to the left, it moves to the left. So essentially, it aligns up with where I was before. If I move far enough left, there's an eyeball there. Hey, look at this. I can copy the eye. So if I want to go ahead and clean this up, I'm going to option click here, and I can kind of go over this. Option click, go over this. Now that kind of worked in a way, but not a great way, because ultimately right now what's going on is, yes, I did cover kind of that hair up, but man, look at that. It's really, there's that hard edge right there. You see it. This sticks out like a sore thumb. So again, I did it just so we could see that. That's not what we normally want to do. So I'm going to undo those things. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and I'll click on my clone tool, and I'm going to change my hardness from 100% to 0%. So I have a nice soft edge to work with. And so I'm going to option click here, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to go over that hair, and I'm going to option click, and I'm going to go over that hair. Now, when we zoom out, it looks okay, but you can see this kind of like almost like kind of odd shift, and I would like to point out why that is. So essentially, let's undo a little bit. When I sampled from here, we had, different shades of yellow that make up our duck, right? So let's zoom in so we can see a little bit. We have all these different shades of yellow that make up our duck, and this is what it looks like. And up at the top, where those kind of hairs are, they look a little bit like this. And essentially, these shades of yellow are brighter. So the thing about the clone tool is it literally copies what it sees here and puts there. So in this case, yes, it got rid of those hairs up there, but that coloring in that duck, that tonal value is not the same. So that sticks out. So that's just not as good as it could be. So we use some other tools to kind of fix that, and I'll get to that in a minute. But let's do something a little fun, okay? Let's go ahead and let's take that clone stamp, and let's go ahead and take our duck, and let's sample its eye right here, and let's go ahead and let's build a Triclops duck. And check it out. It's like our duck has opened its third eye. It's learning the chakras, and its third eye is opening. And essentially, I'd like to just point out that the way that we did this was on a separate layer. So if we turn off our background layer, our original image layer, right there is our single kind of floating eyeball. But when we put them on top of one another, it kind of works out. And as you can see here, when it's floating, it's got that soft edge around it. So then that way it has a much better blend when we go ahead and we place it somewhere else. So that's the clone tool. And the clone tool has been around in Photoshop for a really long time. And it's a staple. And it's something that you do need to kind of become familiar with because you'll use it quite a bit. There are other tools, and if I kind of just move up on the toolbar and I click and hold down, I have a bunch of tools. So I have spot healing, patch, content aware, move. Okay, so there's a lot of options here. We're going to focus on the healing brush. Now, what's spot mean? Spot healing. Spot is just another word for auto here. And I'll get to that because there is definitely some value to that. So let's click on this regular healing brush though first. And this tool is really a lot like the clone stamp tool in the fact that there is a paintbrush, blending modes, there's a source. So we can pick patterns like this pattern, or we can pick sampled. Okay, so it's kind of like the stamper. We get to choose, and we're going to use sampled. Again, patterns are something that 99 out of 100 times we are not using to edit photographs. We might want to paint with them, but that's about it. But we'll use sampled. We have the ability to check align, which we want. We have the ability to check current layers, current and below, and all layers. And again, we're going to go with all because that seems to be something that is easy for us to work with. And there's a couple other options like turn on to ignore adjustment layers when healing, and we don't have one, so that's nothing to worry about. And diffusion, we're going to keep that at 5 at the moment, which is the default setting. I love Photoshop because it allows us to just roll over a word that we may not understand, and it will give us a definition in a way. So diffusion's definition is adjust the degree of diffusion. Well, to explain diffusion, we kind of give away the explanation of the tool. So let me show you it first, and then I'll explain what diffusion actually is. So I'm going to use the tool the same exact way. I'm going to hold the Option key down, and I'm going to get that symbol again right here. So Option click, and then I'm going to come on over here, and I'm going to try to do what I did before. And watch. Hey, that worked out a little bit better. Let's try that again. Pretty good. And if we didn't know that plastic hair existed, I don't know if you would know. And this is what this tool does. Okay, this is what's different between the clone tool and the healing tool. It's diffusion. The clone literally copies one area to another area. Okay, that's what it does. The healing brush, on the other hand, copies this area from its sample and brings it to another area. But what it does is it blends it, or uses diffusion to blend it to what was there as well. So it's much better for tonal values. So it's really cool. Now, and this tool can kind of blend a lot. Like for example, let's do something kind of creepy with our duck here. I'm going to Option click the center here of its forehead, and I'm going to go ahead and like just go right on top of the eyeball here. Okay, I'm going to let go, and look at that. It covered the eyeball, but it did it in a way where it almost appears like there's an eye cavity there because it sensed that was there through the diffusion. Now, when I get into certain areas though, it runs into problems. Like for example, if I grab this here and then try going near the bill, it just starts blending these two colors together, this red and this yellow, to this weird kind of orange color. So this is where the clone and the healing kind of come hand in hand many times. So what I'll do a lot is I'll start with cloning, and I'll option click over here, and I'll clone up there. So option click here and clone here, and then I will take our our healing tool, and I'll option click here, and then I'll go over that again, and that will blend it together. And actually, I just kind of did a kind of a no-no. I tried to do it all in one kind of shot, and that's not what you want to do. Really, what you want to do is you want to option click, and then paint a little bit, and option click and paint a little bit more, and option click and paint a little bit more. That way we're moving around the area a lot rather than just doing it in one kind of shot. Because if you do that, if you move around, it's less likely that you're going to have like pixels that are copied that are spot on the nose. There was the hit TV show Lost a few years ago, and so Lost, DVD, Photoshop, fail. When you do Photoshop, you realize that there's all these things out there called Photoshop fails. Feel free to Google them and look at them and laugh at them too. So let's go ahead and find this right here. The final season of Lost, this was an ad for it. And when we take a look at it, right, what we have going on is we have all these characters here, and we have this clouds in the background. And look at this. See this one here? It's exactly this one here. And this one here is exactly this one here. And to the untrained eye, you might not even notice that. But for people who do this all the time, that sticks out like a sore thumb. And I'll tell you what, there's tons of those things out there. Weird stuff like there are extra hands. People have 6 fingers sometimes. All of a sudden, like there might just be a pair of legs or a foot, and there's no body that goes with it. So people get sloppy sometimes when they're photoshopping. So you have to be aware of that sort of stuff. And that Lost thing, while it's noticeable, it's pretty minimal compared to some of the bad things that are out there. And a lot of times in magazines that are produced weekly or newspapers, things like that, where just they mean to clean something up and they do it just a really bad way. When you know the magic tricks, essentially you see really bad ones. So that's definitely something that you want to be aware of. So the clone tool and the healing brush work really, really well together. When we come back, we're going to take a look at them a little bit further when we're working with a different image, namely this one here. And we're also going to take a look at a couple other editing tools as well. Thank you.